Well, from Wall Street down to Washington, Republican Senator David Vitter and Democratic Senator Sherrod Brown will introduce new legislation aimed at the nation's 4 largest banks today because, as they wrote in an op-ed this morning, quote, J.P. Morgan, Chase, Bank of America, Citigroup, and Wells Fargo are nearly $2 trillion larger than they were before the crisis, with a greater market share than ever. And the federal help continues, not as direct bailouts, but in the form of an implicit government guarantee. The market knows that the government won't allow these institutions to fail. With me now is Senator Vitter of Louisiana. Senator, thank you so much for joining us. And in your legislation,
thanks,
as you noted in your New York Times op-ed, that you're asking banks, these handful of major banks that we just talked about, to have a 15% capital ratio. The CEOs would come back to you and say, how can they do business with that?
Well, they can do business with that, but it does create a cushion against disaster and a cushion for the taxpayer in terms of a bailout. Betty, we're moving forward with this because there have been 3 independent studies in the last year, including Bloomberg, that all say too big to fail is alive and well, and it creates a market distortion, essentially a subsidy, a cost of funds difference that helps the big banks to the tune of about $83 billion a year. That's unfair. Even more importantly, it's very dangerous to the taxpayer.
But, Senator, even the chairman of the Senate Banking Committee, Tim Johnson, says, look, why not let the first of all, why not let Dodd-Frank get finished before even looking at a legislation such as yours?
Well, Dodd-Frank is now passed several years ago. The markets have had plenty of time to digest all of that. You're right, not all the regs are written, but the outline is absolutely there. And the verdict of the markets is that too big to fail is alive and well. I don't see that that's going to change in the next year or 2.
So what are you saying, though? I mean, but why not let Dodd-Frank take care of this?
Because it's not taking care of it, because that's been proved. Dodd-Frank has been law for several years, and the markets look at that and say, yep, we think they'd be bailed out again if this happened again.
Well, how would you, what about regulators themselves, though? I mean, what about letting regulators figure this out, letting regulators take care of this versus Congress?
Betty, you know, there were plenty of regulators around in the 2008 crisis. It didn't help. There were even more regulators around at Chase less than a year ago when they had their disastrous losses. Lots of smart people in the room, including Jamie Dimon, and it didn't help. The solution is not to have super smart people in the room with gobs of regulation. I think the solution has to be more systemic, and more capital, a greater cushion, is a lot more sure a protection than either gobs of regulation or people who really know how smart they are.
Right, but I mean, you're talking about events that have happened in the past. You know, clearly the regulators, though, have been put on alert since the financial crisis. The SEC, the CFTC. I mean, they've all put better measures in place to make sure that this doesn't happen again.
Well, Betty, all those measures were put in place before that last incident, those enormous losses at Chase. Why didn't they catch that? They had no idea that was going on in anything like real time. Chase management had no idea that was happening in anything like real time. I think that incident, thank goodness it wasn't big enough to disrupt the market, but that incident proves that the answer is not gobs of more regulators. It's something more systemic, like greater capital cushion.
Okay, so then how would you enforce something like your bill?
Well, it's pretty simple and straightforward, and I think that's one of its strengths. It establishes capital requirements. First of all, it defines how you measure capital in a very transparent way that cannot be gamed at all easily, like Basel II and Basel III can be. And then it establishes minimum capital requirements, which are greater for the mega banks.
Senator, do you think you have enough votes to get this through the Senate?
That's building every day. I'm not sure exactly where we are today, but I can tell you the world has changed on this issue since a year ago, and Republicans and Democrats are a lot more open to it because they realize several years after Dodd-Frank passed, too big to fail is unfortunately alive and well. So the bipartisan consensus and support is growing every day. And not just in Congress. Among regulators, you have regulators on the left and right who have made comments that support this notion. Among commentators and analysts, including George Will and Peggy Noonan on the right.
But Senator, I'm still trying to figure out what it is about Dodd-Frank, because it has, yes, it has passed, but it's still yet to be completely finalized. So what is it about Dodd-Frank that you don't think is working? Because others who have followed the bank say that, look, you know, they have pulled back on risky activities like prop trading. You had the London whale scandal that happened at JP Morgan, and it did not take the bank down because they had some capital cushions. They had the cushions to withstand that. So what exactly is it that you're finding that Dodd-Frank is not sufficient enough in?
Well, the market, and this has been verified, including by Bloomberg, the market overall believes that these banks would be bailed out again. Because of that, the market gives these banks a subsidy, a lower cost of funds, a lower cost of doing business. Bloomberg has quantified that at about $83 billion a year. So I would simply say my verdict isn't particularly important, or Sherrod Brown's, or any individual. But I do think we should take note of what the market has decided several years after Dodd-Frank has passed.
All right, Senator, thank you very much. Appreciate you joining me. Senator David Vitter of Louisiana.